writing.
Right.
I want to talk about your play Made on the Moon that premiered in 1996 at the Fringe in Edinburgh. What gave you the inspiration for that play, and how do you write a play? I've only ever written novels, so I'm very intrigued as to what the difference is. And then you actually made that into a novella afterwards. So was it a weird experience to change it over?
No, not at all. In fact, it was quite joyful. But Made on the Moon has a long history. Um, and it is very dear to me because, when you're young, usually the first thing you write is autobiographical. That seems to be the way. The young writers in Thomas Wolfe and Look Homeward Angel and Fitzgerald in his early one about his college days. My first novel was about, I called A Portrait of Controversy, and it was not at all autobiographical. So, but Made on the Moon turned out to be, oddly enough. Now, the reason is I was a huge lover of the space program. I was 20, I guess, when they landed on the moon, 1969. And as a kid, I was enamored with space and science fiction and space shows. And of course, Star Trek, when it came along, blew away everybody's mind. And then they stopped going to the moon, and there was a space shuttle. And I first wrote it as a short story, because early on, basically what I was doing was short stories. I first wrote it as a short story, which was basically an interview between a reporter and a man, Stanley Lewis, and his first statement is, I had wanted to go to the moon from the time I was an infant. Not a child, not a boy, not a teenager, but an infant. Okay? And it was sort of a Q&A interview with this guy. Then I started working, the arts magazine I worked for, New World, was based out of the Inner City Cultural Center in Los Angeles. Now, this was a multi-ethnic cultural center that was born out of the Watts riots. That was a huge riots we had in the mid-'70s in Los Angeles among mainly African Americans fighting, obviously, for rights and the fact that just, they were not being treated well. So the city started paying attention, and this cultural center was born. And it was wonderful. It had theater, it had dance, it had the visual arts, and we had the art magazine. But being based out of there, I went to the theater a lot, and I went and I saw a lot of dance and this, that, and the other. And it was quite an education. And then there was a one program where they were doing probably, I don't know if they were full productions or readings of one-act plays. So I said, well, wait a minute, this is kind of dialogue. I'll turn this into a one-act play. So I did that at first, and it never went there. But once I got into that, it started to broaden out. And it was basically about this man, Stanley Lewis, who says, I wanted to go to the moon from the time I was an infant. He's in some kind of gray facility in a place you don't know where it is. And he's being interviewed by 3 mysterious interviewers. And he plays with them, and he mucks with their mind. And he talks about his life, and you go there. And the 3 actors that would play the 3 interviewers would play people in his, not only in his life, past life, but in his fantasies of lives he may have had. And that was wonderful for theater, because theater, to me, what I like the most is when it's not just a kitchen sink drama, you know what I'm saying? Although those can be fine, but where you can manipulate and you suddenly, the characters morph for change. And that's what was happening here. And I was having a lot of fun writing that, but I got stuck on it. It stopped at a certain point, about halfway through. And that point was very autobiographical, because it was me who had wanted to go to the moon from the time I was very young. Maybe not from an infant, but that's what fiction is. You expand things a little bit. And I put in a lot of myself in that, and then it just kind of stopped dead. I was doing all those other things we were talking about. I was going to Japan. I was producing this. I was working on this long novel called Right. When I came back from Japan with my wife, and we got an apartment here in the Valley, one day I'm coming out of the shower, drying myself, and my wife yells at me, "Come quick, the Challenger is launching." And then, of course, it explodes. That huge, horrible accident after 32 seconds of being in the air. And it was shocking and it was stunning. And I'm sure I sat there for the next hour watching that. But then I got up, I went to my desk, which I had a desk in my bedroom, and I started writing the play again. And it started with the explosion of the Challenger. And then the rest of the play just flowed. So the first half of Made on the Moon is very autobiographical. The second half is not. And it turned out to be, I started it as a polemic for the space program. I was going to write something that would make people go to the moon again. Well, what I soon learned is, and when I learned I was really a writer, and that's what I had to do, it became about me. It became about the human condition. It became about something else. It wasn't just a polemic for the space program. It was about a person, is Stanley Lewis, and his life and his dreams and his hopes and his inadequacies, especially because he's a very inadequate person. And I won't tell you the rest because it has a kind of surprise ending. But what we did there is we went to Edinburgh, partly because of my work in animation, because I had an animation studio in London. Some of the staff of that, which I would go visit, of course, some of the staff, they were young and they were into theater. So we would go to theater at night on my visits. And one day I asked I had finished the play by this time. I asked one of the staff, I said, and she was like the front desk person, but she'd been in drama. I said, I got a play. Would you like to read it? And she said, yeah. I said, oh, okay, I'll send it to you. And she read it and she said, God, this is great. I have a lot of friends, young actors. Let us take it to Edinburgh. I said, okay, do it. So they took it to Edinburgh and had I think a 3-week run. I was there, and my wife and my little daughter at the time was there for the last week. It was wonderful and glorious. We saw the fireworks over the castle and all this, that, and the other. And I was really hoping that would spur it on, like it does so many people. Unfortunately, it didn't. But we go back to LA, and my wife sees about a play reading program at a major mid-sized theater here in LA. She said, submit it to them. And I grumbled, but I did. And they loved it and they wanted to do it. So they did a great reading with an American actor named Paul Provenza. He's really a comic and an actor, stand-up comedian and an actor. And he fell in love with it. So he decided he was going to get it produced. And we got to the point where we were set to go off Broadway, although in center of Manhattan, about 45th Street, I think, for at least a 4-week run with Paul starring, had a director lined up. And this was going to be very exciting. And I was very excited because I love the theater. And then Paul gets tapped for a TV series to film in Vancouver, which of course was not terribly close to Broadway in New York, and the producer pulled out. So there was that disappointment. And then there was another regional theater here in California that loved it and told me, we're 99.9% sure we're going to do it. Yay! And then they didn't take my phone calls anymore. Every road is kind of rough, isn't it, kid? So eventually, I still was trying to see if there's and we did a reading at the Writers Guild, which I think you and I communicated about, a stage reading, because I was involved in that program at the Writers Guild, so I did my play. And I had 2 Star Trek doctors, John Billingsley from Star Trek Voyager and Robert Picardo, from Enterprise, and Robert Picardo from Star Trek Voyager in it, and they did a fabulous reading. I directed it. That caused a little bit of buzz, then it went away. So finally, as I was getting more into my novels, I finally said, I love this story, and I'm just not even close to anything in the theater world anymore. I'm going to novelize it. And it was smooth as silk. It afforded me, I didn't change much. I don't think I changed anything from the play, except was able to add things. But it was set up because I love language, and I love writing language to be spoken. I write even my novels with the eye or the ear, so to speak, that it will be spoken out loud. So it allowed me to when I was describing things in prose, to stay with the same stylistic and sort of larger than life form that the rest of the play was, and I was very happy with the outcome. So that then we Crossroad Press published that, and it's available on Amazon and those sorts, only as a ebook at the moment. So
I really
because,
love that as well, the story of that and how it evolved and how it didn't go into the direction that you wanted, and you went this way and that way, and there were different opportunities and different paths, and none of them worked. And I think that's important too and at the time it can seem really stressful for the individual, but everything happens as it should. And also, just because one thing doesn't work out, and this is a tough industry to be in at times as well, so you need to just make sure that you have the patience and you just keep trekking on. And if it doesn't work the first 5-8 times, then maybe try and find a different avenue. And you did that, and you've transformed it into a novel.
well, that's it exactly. And in fact, some of my other novels I based on screenplays I'd written. So not the fixer novels, but well, my latest one, Creature Feature, started off as a screenplay, and I was able to turn that into a novel, delightfully so for me. It was smooth as silk again, and I really enjoyed it because I finally came to the realization that my art is prose. In fiction or in writing a think piece or writing an article or even a book review. It's important to me, words are important to me, and how you use words. And again, the poetic nature you can get, which inspired again by Ray Bradbury on that. And even recently I'm reading, we have an American author, John Updike, and he's gone now, but he's famous series of books, the Rabbit books, about a character nicknamed was Rabbit. And I'm rereading those. I read those when I was a young man, and I'm rereading them, and I'm struck now about how beautiful his prose is, which I didn't appreciate in my 20s, and I'm so happy to be able to appreciate now. But yeah, you have these stories are stories. I have this philosophy that a real writer is not a person who wants to write, but a person who can't help but write. And when you create a story and characters, they do become alive to you. They continue to exist in your head, and they knock at it. If you haven't sent them out into the world, they say, when's our turn? So some of these stories, which I'd written originally as screenplays, and I was out of the industry and away from any contacts, as we said, and wanting to write nothing but prose anyway, I said, well, let me see if I can put them in this form. But prose is my art. That's my art. And it's what I love. I love the manipulation of words. I see it like a sculptor with clay, or chipping away at marble, or a painter with the thickness of the paint on the canvas, or a dancer and the moves they make and how they make them. You translate all that to writing. I don't particularly like what I call just going from point A to point B writing, mundane writing, mechanical writing. I want the universal you of a writer, to sculpt something for me. And like W. Somerset Maugham, put me in that world, infuse within me the characters you've created, make me believe I'm them. And that is often done through the power of the words and the word choices you make. That's the thrill to me of the novel form, especially the long form of fictionalized prose.
I'm very curious as to what your thoughts are then, because obviously you've been in the profession for quite a few years. You have a lot of experience in numerous fields as well. So what are your thoughts when it comes to self-publishers versus traditional publishers? Because independently publishing has only been around for the last 10 years. And, there is often a debate. But there's often a debate on the quality of the independently published. And I know that some are phenomenal and some are lacking, whether that's due to budget or inexperience as well. So what are your thoughts on the independently published industry?
Well,
yeah,
I've been using. But I'm sorry, you had a follow-up
well,
question?
I was And say also, and what advice would you offer to those who choose to go down that avenue as to how they might be able to better their writing?
Well, let's start with the whole world of publishing, which right now is divided between the mainstream, which is owned by like 5 huge conglomerates, the major publishers in London and here in America and New York, and of course you've got publishers in Australia and Africa has publishers, and South America and what have you. But we're English speakers, so let's talk about the English. It's very hard to crack that citadel, and they're now big corporate entities. Not that the individual people and their individual parts of it aren't still dedicated to literature and love literature, but I found, it seems to me, it's become a sort of a thing in writing, and especially fiction, all these writing courses in universities. And we have here in America, we call it the Master of Fine Arts, an MFA in creative writing. And this is what happened to the visual arts. If you notice, most artists today wind up taking an MFA from a university and then wind up teaching, because that's how you support yourself. And writers are doing the same thing. And that is your contacts. That's your networking. They get you to these publishers or to the New Yorker or what have you. I mean, not only, some book over the transom may suddenly thrill an editor, but it's a small percentage. Well, there's still a lot of people out there that want to write. Now, I started at a point where I had gotten frustrated with an agent I had who was first trying to sell my Blood is Pretty novel. And I certainly was frustrated with agents I had here in Hollywood, but that's a whole different story. And then what happened was a change in the technology, and that was print-on-demand machines, and then ebooks, digital, what I call independent digital publishing. And at first, that allowed people to publish their own books, often or self-publish through what we used to call vanity press. And there was one popped up called Publish America. And they would pay you $1 for the rights to your book and then put your book out and they'd do a cover and all that. And it's available on Amazon and what have you. They've gone by the wayside. But what I found happened is a lot of writers who were not second tier. There were backlist writers at the publishers. They wrote the mysteries that weren't necessarily the bestsellers, but they had a consistent sales of a series, or the science fiction books or what have you. The mid-list, that's the term, mid-list writers. They were being dropped, or they were starting to have a harder and harder, and these were professional writers who had been vetted many times by the larger publishers. They were getting frustrated that they couldn't sell their books anymore. So they started to use this technology, especially in ebooks, and through Amazon and the whole Amazon situation, to get their work out there. Because a writer doesn't just want to write, although that's the great joy. You want readers. You want someone to read and hopefully appreciate your work. And these were good writers, so they would do that, and they would get their work out there. Well, and they were usually people who were technically proficient. A lot of writers aren't. So the other writers who were their friends who aren't, at conventions would say, could you publish mine? So they would wind up creating these publishing companies. Now, I had booked the novelization that I wrote on the film that I was involved in, 12 Dogs of Christmas. That was published by a mainstream publisher. But I was talking to someone about trying to get my book moved from somewhere, the Blood is Pretty book moved from an outfit I hated, and the rights had gone back to me, and they said, wait, you ought to contact Crossroad Press, which I did. And they started publishing my books. They now have like 2,000 writers. And this guy, and they are writers who love writers, and they are technically proficient, so they know how to do this, and they get it out there. And you still, though, wind up having to do most of the marketing of your own book. But if you're a mid-list writer at Random House, it's going to be the same thing. They're going to put out a press release, and they're going to print a 2,000 print run, or maybe 10,000 print run, put you in the bookstores. If you don't sell, you're out of there and on remainder in 3 weeks. And then your book goes away. This way, your book get out there. And a lot of these writers had books that their publishers had given back to them. So they were putting up books, they were rebirthing their books, and it started to become very successful. Well, besides Crossroad, I had a novel which has been my most successful to date, called Traveling in Space, which is a big science fiction satire that I wanted to get out there. But I had met through a friend, a guy who was a space flight engineer at JPL. Now, if you've ever heard of JPL, that's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It's a big outfit just east here in Altadena, or by Pasadena, and they create spaceship and what have you. And he was literally from the ground flying the Cassini probe that went around Saturn for like 7 years or something. And in Traveling in Space, the main characters are aliens, but they're scientists, and there's human scientists in the story as well. I said, can you read this for me, Dave? He liked my book, Blood is Pretty. He really loved that. That was already out. I said, read this for me, and just, you work with scientists. Let me know if you think I got the feeling right. And so he read it, and he said, yeah, not only did you get the feeling right, I love this book. And why don't I help you self-publish it? And I said, yeah, because that term was still bad, right? I said, I don't want to self-publish it, but you're publishing your own book on space flight. Why don't you create a publishing company? So he did for me. Blue Roof Press, and he came out, he published Traveling in Space, and he published my Ray Bradbury book. So he was my other publisher, and then recently I had a publisher who was a Writers Guild member that I had met, and was part and parcel of this group that was starting to say, okay, we're over 50, and Hollywood doesn't want to see from us. They don't even want to hear from us, and they certainly don't want to read our stuff, so let's write novels, let's do that. And she learned all about this process of ebooks and print on demand and Amazon. And she started her own publishing company. And originally I did a 3-book deal with her. Now I've pulled out of that deal because there's been problems with it. Not really her fault, due to a partner. And a wonderful friend, a writer named Jean Raby, who I absolutely recommend her new series of mystery novels. She said, create your own imprint, publish your own books. That's what I'm doing now. It's much better. But she's been a professional journalist and writer for years. So I just created a Magpie Press, and Creature Feature, my latest, I just put that out through Magpie Press. So it all boils down to this as to quality. There was a great science fiction author named Theodore Sturgeon, and he had what is called Sturgeon's Law, which if I get it right, it's something like 95% of everything is crap. And he came up with this law when there was only the mainstream publishers, okay? So if you take that law, 95% of everything's gonna be crap or mediocre at best. So you take your chances. But if you wanna write and you have the ability to do this, go for it, as my friend Ray Bradbury would say. I hope you're doing it because you love writing and not because you think you're suddenly going to become a bestseller, because that most likely ain't going to happen. You've got to write for the joy of the writing. You got to write because you want to. And it's what you write. Now, a lot of what's happening in this is genre writing. There's not a lot of mainstream writing. I cross all genres because I'm a comic writer. I'm a satirist. So I use genres like science fiction or thriller, or some might say I abuse them. I don't know. But I've written also mainstream books, and I have some more coming out, and such as this book, By the Sea, which is a simple comic novel, and the theme is happily ever after. It's all about what makes us happy. And I wrote that because I had always wanted to write a story that took place in a residential hotel on a beach. Why? I don't know, but I always did. There's something about the microcosm of it and all that. And it turned out to be a story about this hotel on this rather scruffy beach that's not really a beach anybody goes to. And it's a residential hotel where people come to live, although they have, transeats now and then. in a very small town somewhere in America. I don't know if it's East Coast or West Coast, doesn't really matter. And the people there and the people surrounding and their stories. And it's about each one of the characters in there and what eventually is it that they want out of life to make them happy. And I try to show this in as comic a way as possible, but also, hopefully we get to know these people well. So, I love writing all these different things. The problem is it's hard to market yourself.
That was going to be my next question. How do you market? Because when you go down the independent avenue, especially, or even if you are traditionally published, to be successful, you do have to market yourself. What do you do?
Well, I'll tell you, I haven't done much because I'm not good at it. You do the Facebook, you do the tweet. I had one bookstore here in LA, which is no longer here, unfortunately, which loved me and I would always have my book launches there. But it is a totally digital thing now. So you talk about networking and contacts. It's trying to find readers. When you find readers that are loyal to you, you keep in touch with them. And they become friends, and you hope that they recommend your books. And then the best thing to sell your books and get it out there are these promo sites that you can get on, Booksy and BookSends and what have you. There's only one that's really effective, though, and that's BookBub. Very hard to get onto. Now, I've been fortunate to get onto the international BookBub with Traveling in Space, and I think my Journey to Where, which is one of my other science fiction-like books. And I did international because it's easier to get onto, but international basically is the UK, Australia, and Canada. Well, I'm an Anglophile. I'm a cliche American, loving British mysteries Anglophile. And I've spent a lot of time in London, and I dearly love that city. And I love Australians. I just, because they're Australians. I don't know what to tell you. Because I spent a lot of time in Canada when I worked, produced some shows for a comedy festival up there. And they're readers, and some of them are just more serious readers than Americans. So I said, I'm happy to promote it. And my last couple of promotions, I, made it on several of the bestsellers lists in certain categories in Australia, in the UK, and in Canada. Eventually, I'm hoping with my new imprint, and this is one reason why Gene encouraged me to do it, is to get one of the new books or one of my other books when I start to bring them over under my imprint through BookBub and start to sell them. But it's as simple as that. It's hard. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books published every year by the mainstream and now by the independent and digital publishers. So it's a buyer beware thing. You get on Amazon, you look at a book, you think it's interesting, you read what you read. You read to see if they've gotten reviews from any, like I just got a review today on my new book from the Montreal Times. So that's a newspaper up in Montreal, or from, well-regarded blogs, and you try to get reviews, and you hope you've written something that's going to attract people. You hope you've designed a cover that's going to attract them, and you cross your fingers. That's about it. But you got to go into it not thinking you're suddenly going to become wealthy and rich and famous. If it happens, more power to you. Bless you, and tell me how you did it.
Yeah.
The joy of the work that I think has to be utmost in your mind if you're the kind of writer that I like. And I think you're likely to produce a better work if you're writing out of passion.
Yeah.
As Barry used to always say, love what you do and do what you love.
What are you working on at the moment?
At the moment, I'm working on a short story, which is odd because I haven't written short stories since my 20s. But again, Jean Rabe, R-A-B-E, she's part of an organization that I'm part of, which is called the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. Now, do you know what a media tie-in writer is?
No.
That's writers who do novelizations of movies, which not too many are done anymore, or novels written in a big franchise that the intellectual property is owned by somebody else. So all those people that write all those hundreds of Star Wars novels and Star Trek novels and Dragons and Dungeon novels. There's a lot of novelizations of video games because they're so popular, especially the role-playing video games. Anything with a franchise like that. And these writers they're the most generous, and these are people who really love what they're doing. If you talk about it, the novelization used to be a bad word in publishing, in the 50s and 60s. They've novelized film scripts since the 20s, actually, since the silent days. But it used to be, say, in the 50s and 60s when they were doing a lot of it, when pocketbooks came out, when paperbacks. The writers doing it, it was, hack work. I'm doing it for the money. And they would use pseudonyms. But the current writers are writers who love these franchises. They love Star Wars and they want to play, as they say, they want to play in that person's sandbox. Or they love Star Trek. Or they love Dragon Quest or whatever. I don't play video games, so I don't know what all these things are. And they're generous and they're good people. And Jean was one of them, although she's published original novels. And she's recently just totally gone off and created a whole series of mysteries, 4 of them right now, called the Piper Blackwell Mysteries. And they're damn good. I highly recommend them. So it's Jean, G-E-A-N, and Rabe, R-A-B-E. You'll find her on Amazon. And they're the Piper Blackwell Mysteries. There's 4 now. But she for the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers is co-editing a new anthology we're doing for charity. All the money will go to a literacy project. And she said, you've got to write a short story for it. And I said, I don't like short stories. It's not my form. I haven't written since the 20s. She said, you're going to do it. So I'm writing a short story for her now. I'm sort of midway in that. But my big project, which I had to put aside to do my marketing for Creature Feature, my latest novel, and to write this short story, a novel called The Definition of Luck, which I will say very little about because I really believe you don't talk about a work in progress. But I've written the first part of it. I got to go to the second part. It's kind of a combo of a realistic novel with some sci-fi elements of a big sci-fi trope that a lot of people write about, but I'm taking a totally different tack. And I have no idea if it's going to work, but I'm having a good time.
At the end of every interview, I do 5 little random questions. So the first one is, what's your least favorite food and why?
Squash, zucchini, and eggplant. All squash, except for pumpkin pie. But, to me, zucchini and eggplant are the slug of the vegetable world. Absolutely hate those things. Crap.
What is something that you are absolutely terrible at, whether it's singing,
anything to do with sports. Hate sports. I'm probably the person in the world that hates sports. I don't like sports.
Okay.
I have no reason to watch and pay money and worship all those big bruiser of guys that used to bully me when I was in high school. I can't. Why would I do that? I don't want to do that. No, it's sports. Don't like sports.
Who are the authors that you like to follow?
Currently, Jean Rabe, certainly. But I read a lot of, not always the most contemporary. I read a lot of English literature of the 19th century. I like Dickens. I like Trollope. George Eliot, Middlemarch. I need to read some of her other books. And on to Conan Doyle and H.G. Wells and Jules Verne over in France. And then there's an American writer of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, John Dos Passos, whose great trilogy of novels, the USA trilogy, were hugely important in showing me again how you can manipulate words and worlds and tone and create a particular tone. And of course, then Ray Bradbury, W. Somerset Maugham, and what have you. And then some contemporary English novels like Ian McEwan and Julian Barnes, David Lodge, who wrote White Teeth? female novelist. She's fantastic. She's now a professor here in America because they all become professors. No one's asked me to be a professor, by the way.
Yet. That's the next path. What's a unique skill that you have that not many people know that you have?
Everybody knows I have it because the only skill I have is writing. It's, I can microwave with the best of them, but, I don't want any other skill because it may take up my time. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if reading is a skill, but everybody knows I read, obviously that, this is not a fake backdrop here. That's just part of my library, mine and my wife's, I hasten to add. She's a big reader too. Other than that, I can go, brrr. I don't know if that's a skill.
That is a skill because I can't do that.
Neither of my wife or my daughters can do it. So
there's your unique skill.
I hold that over them.
And last one, what's your life motto?
The joy of art is in the doing.
I really like that.
That's what I live by.
That is all my questions. Do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, except it's been delightful talking to you. I love this technology where I can talk to a lovely person, a fellow writer in Australia.
Thank you so much for helping on today, Steven.
Very much. Thank you very much. And best of luck with all your work.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And I will talk to you soon.